first of all, a big welcome to all of you from all over the world. And we're all here to find out more about working as a freelance journalist in the magazine industry. Let me introduce myself. My name is Nicola Meyer, and I'm the principal of the Writers College. And I've been doing this for the past 16 years, and I'll host the discussion tonight. So on our team tonight, we've got two award-winning journalists, and they're both tutors at the Writers College, and we feel really privileged that they've been able to join us. We've got Tipping-Woods and Ewan McDonald, and they write for many different publications, magazines, websites, newspapers, and I'm going to ask them to tell us a little bit more about what they do, a little bit about their background. So Di, would you like to kick off with that?
I've been working as a freelance journalist for about 15 years now. I studied journalism at Rhodes University in South Africa. And I think Nicola had said we could share a few highlights just in the brief introduction. So this is a highlight to be here talking to you all today, because I'm a very different journalist to the very young, frightened graduates, you know, who left university to try and make it in this world almost 2 decades ago. I can genuinely say that I love my job. I just got back from a wilderness backpack trail on assignment for Getaway magazine, and one of the women on the trail said, you know, as a question around the fire, what would you all be doing if you didn't have to make money? And the truth is that I would choose to do exactly what I do. So I feel very privileged to have sort of that passion and that sense of purpose as a writer. Career-wise, you know, I started off with an internship at the Mail and Guardian after having written for sort of our university newspaper many years, and then I took a little bit of a hiatus and moved into the corporate communication space. But I realized this is really where my passion and my skills lie, and I went back to freelancing full-time about 15 years ago. Yeah, a big sort of milestone in my career was my first assignment for a magazine called Wild, which sort of symbolized the start of, you know, my career as a sort of a niche writer in the conservation, travel, and development space. And I went on to have a 9-year relationship with that magazine until it sadly closed down 2 years ago. Another highlight was obviously getting my first international byline in a proper international magazine. But really, for me, it's about the people that I get to meet and the stories that I get to tell, and how I get to learn and grow in my craft. Yeah, the places that you get to see are cool, but really it's the people and the stories, you know, their voices matter, their work matters. It should never really be about the journalists. This feels a little bit awkward. It should really always be about the, you know, the people that we talk to and the stories that we tell. So, yeah, that's me in a nutshell, and mainly write about the intersection of conservation and travel, but who knows, years to come where that may go.
Great. Well, thank you and welcome. Ewan.
I actually think that Di just nailed something that's very important, which is it's not about journalists. It's not about us talking about ourselves. We're both of us probably a bit embarrassed to do that, because we like to tell stories, not be the story. I was never really a freelance writer until quite recently. I was on the other side of the media machine. Journalism was my day job in very large media organisations and small magazines in New Zealand, Australia, and the UK briefly. But for the past 5 years, I've been a freelancer in the gig economy. So A, I've been an employer of freelance writers, and B, now I are one. So I know things from both sides. I got into this fantastic lifestyle, which we call journalism, because my mother decided that she wanted me to be an Anglican priest. And by the time we got to about 15 or 16, I realized she was quite serious about this. The only thing I was any good at school was sort of writing essays and doing English. And so that was point one. Point B was I found that the diploma course for journalism in New Zealand was 1 year, and the university course for everything else was 3 years. So, you know, that was my plan B. I've worked in daily newspapers, I've worked in Sunday newspapers, music magazines, sports magazines, women's magazines, life. Anyone will have me, basically. You know what I mean? If they'll employ me, I'm up for it. And really, journalism's given me a fantastic life, but the best thing about it really has been being able to tell other people's stories and to see the world and to share the joys and the wonders of the world that I've seen with other people. That's my story. I guess it was better than being an Anglican priest, really.
Well, big welcome to you, Ewan, as well. And what we'll do is we'll kick off with the questions, and people sent through questions prior to this meeting, but hopefully there is going to be some time to throw the questions open to the floor. So I'm just going to crack on with these questions. Right, so the first one is, I find it a big challenge to phone a potential source for an interview, calling myself a freelance journalist writing an article for X magazine, as per the course notes. It feels misleading. Any advice? So this is a student of ours who's currently, who has completed the freelance journalism course.
I am phone phobic. I really get completely chewed up about having to make a phone call to someone. Now that may sound strange for someone who's been in journalism for this long. The best way that I have discovered to break the ice is to send a very brief 3-paragraph email to said person and say, hey, my name is Ewan McDonald. I'm a freelance journalist working on an assignment / writing an article, a potential article for whatever.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I'd like to cover. Would you be prepared to talk to me?
Yeah.
Here are my steps. Please come back to me within 24 hours, 48 hours. That's the way that it works for me.
Yeah, brilliant. I think the world has changed in the last 16 years as well, because those course notes were written 16 years ago when it might have been perfectly fine to pick up the phone. But I have heard over the years that people are more and more averse to answering their phones, and an email is perfectly acceptable. So Di, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I was just going to say I like the language there, working on an assignment, because sometimes it can be easier to say I'm working on an assignment than like I'm writing a story. Yeah, so I get that, and I'm also not a natural phone caller. Sometimes you do just have to pick it up, and the only way to do that is to just make the call. But what you can do to prepare yourself is make sure that you've prepared and that you've done your research and that you know what you want to get out of the phone. Be specific about what you're asking, check that it's a good time to have the conversation. And then if you are using that call to set up a follow-up interview, be clear about the parameters and the availability of that person in terms of their own time. And then what I've generally found is that, unlike myself, most people do quite like to talk about themselves and their work. So I think you would probably find that most people you speak to are actually more receptive than you might think. Quote the person accurately as well. Respect them when you then use the material that they give you, if you get to that point. And keep in mind sort of imposter syndrome, because it's something that I still struggle with, and I've been doing this for nearly 2 decades. A lot of us share that feeling of like, well, who am I to be asking you these questions about something important or significant, or to take up your time for the story? And I think the imposter syndrome is something that journalists struggle with, throughout their careers. At least I do. So I think you just have to fake it till you make it. Be confident, be prepared, and then be professional, depending on how the conversation.
I think that's very, very valuable advice, because just reading between the lines in this question, if this is a beginner writer, I'm assuming if she's saying it feels misleading to call herself a freelance journalist and to say she's working on an assignment, it's about probably the integrity of that, of saying that, but there isn't really an alternative in the beginning, is there? You just have to jump in there. Do you agree?
I do agree that it's a very big jump. I understand the very big jump. So I think that the email approach is very less intrusive or invasive, and it allows that subject to come back to you and say, yes, I'm up for this. Let's go to the next. Let's talk about it.
After the implosion of the magazine industry in New Zealand, and I'm sure we can say South Africa too, I'm not sure what the situation is in the UK right now, but how much work is there really for inexperienced freelancers? Di, do you want to start us off on that one?
I think maybe Ewan should go first there, since he's been on the other side of the fence. But I mean, from my perspective, I can just say we're facing the same challenges in South Africa. It's hard to land a gig, and it's hard to get that first breakthrough. So the best advice that I was given was to really look at the markets and the publications and magazines that are out there, and do your homework really well first. I used to go in with a story, and then I would try and find a home for that story. So I'd be like, oh, I've got this great story, and I'm going to try and pitch it to the Sunday Times, or I'm going to try and pitch it to the Saturday Star, or whatever it is. And it's helped me to change that model around. So now I have a list of clients that I really like and want to work for. And I go in and look for the gaps rather than coming in with the story as kind of a preconceived idea. I think you're better able to align with the publication's needs in that way. And if you've got something good, they'll take it. You do just have to have a thick skin, and you have to just get used to not hearing back from people sometimes and people saying no. But I think if you do persist and you go in focused, being specific about what you can offer, and you keep at it, there still are opportunities out there.
Great.
Good advice. Good advice and very well put. Clearly, there are not as many openings, there's not as many magazines as there were. Excuse me. However, it's the old story. A really good original idea is what the editor wants. And it doesn't matter whether that idea is from a new young writer or an old stager. It's the idea and the pitch that will win the day for me.
If I can catch, sorry, carry on.
No, you go.
No, I was just going to say, and the art of the pitch is also something that I recently did a course on this as well with a coach for myself to try and get better at pitching, because that's quite a specific art form, and you often invest quite a lot of time in the pitch. That can be frustrating because they don't always pay off. But what you do find is that you build up kind of like a cupboard of stories and pitches, and if they're not too time sensitive, that effort that you put into trying to make the pitch as strong and as tight as possible, even if it doesn't pay off at your initial kind of foray into a particular magazine space, you might find an opportunity 6 months later where you can kind of tweak it a little because the basics are there, and then resell it. So see the pitches as an investment, not a frustration, and work hard on getting pitches solid.
Yeah,
great. The other thing too is that you have to understand, particularly in New Zealand, with our unique situation, that really there's no point in going to a travel editor of a Sunday newspaper or a magazine and saying, hey, I've got this fantastic story on 25 reasons why you should go to the Louvre. Well, that just ain't possible at the moment. You really tailor your pitches to what is practical and what is reasonable for people to do. And at the moment, I mean, the Australian travel bubble has been paused. So at the moment, it's New Zealand travel. And you have to come up with original, different, vibrant ideas that are realistic for the magazine's readers to undertake at the moment.
Okay. So I'm hearing that there is work, but it's all about the original idea And Di, you mentioned rather working from the magazine backwards rather than trying to take your idea to a magazine. And I'm going to jump in with a quick question, because we do want to know, can you make a living as a freelance writer? So I'm going to throw that in, and I'm also going to ask, how many clients, you know, like Di, you said you've got some magazines that you like working for, and you, and I'm sure it's the same for you. How many do you need to be able to earn enough that you don't just have to eat beans on toast?
I think that certainly in the beginning, you have to regard it as building up into a career rather than a career at the start. It's a very small country with a small market, and a lot of people wanting to be in that space. So I think as a beginner writer, as a junior writer, as a starting out writer, you need to look on it as an investment in a future career. I'm sorry to be brutal, but really, at the moment, post-COVID,
Okay.
when the borders still closed, it's something to be developed, rather than thinking you can jump into the New Zealand magazine world, Australian magazine world, and have a career overnight.
Yeah.
That's the unfortunate reality.
Okay. So I'm hearing it's a slow journey, and you've obviously got to be persistent. Hi, Helen. So Di, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just recap the question for me there. It was about can you make
a living, A, and part B, then how many clients or regular magazines or publications or websites would you need to be working for? Yeah.
Okay, you can make a living. I think I'm living proof of that. It's not always fantastic, and you've got to be resilient and able to roll with the punches. But the best advice I ever got was to see myself as a business, not as just a freelancer. Because I often used to use the language, oh, I'm just a freelancer. And it was a colleague of mine who said, stop saying that. You're a business, and you need to work out what you need to earn at the end of each month, and then work back from that. You know, again, sort of look at the end result and then kind of fill up your calendar accordingly. And you do have to juggle. Another piece of advice I got was that you've got to sell the same story 6 times. So in the travel writing space, you can't just say, well, I'm off to Livingston to do this cool story about a train, you know, steam train safari for a particular travel magazine, because it's increasingly hard to get magazines to cover costs and time away from the office. So you've got to be creative. You've got to think, well, who else is in Livingston? Can I do a profile on an old timer who's got a passion for restoring steam trains? What food are they serving? Maybe there's a chef who is working with indigenous local ingredients. So you go on one trip and you find obviously variations on your story or your theme, and you try and tie those up before you start incurring costs. And then you also become the queen of the side hustle. So I write for the college, you know, work for the college, I tutor. I love doing it because I find that it keeps me fresh and I keep learning, and I'm exposed to people and ideas, you know, that don't allow me to stagnate. And the clients that I do have, I really try and look after. So for me, the gold in the freelance world is like a long-term relationship with a publication or an editor. And you know, you go in and don't go in looking to just sell one story. Go in looking to build a relationship, and have those conversations. You know, just say to the editor, well, do you have a schedule for the next 6 months or the next 12 months? Like, you know, what else do you need? Maybe I'm going in as a travel writer, but they really want something else that I could maybe turn my skills to and you know, also do for them. Also work on your photographic skills. So the days are also, I had one client that sends me off on assignment with photographers, but otherwise I generally have to do my own photos. But financially that can also work better for me, because if it's a magazine that pays for photographs, then I can also obviously make some money off that. So there's a lot of you know, sort of hustling and you know, trying to to juggle and make the maths and the numbers work at the end of the day. And then obviously you need a buffer, because you can also burn out if you've just got to keep making it rain constantly. So, you know, you've got to do all the sensible stuff, like try and have a couple of months salary in a bank account somewhere. So yeah, it's not an easy way to make a living, but I mean, I don't think there are too many jobs that are easy, and this one has got so many perks and rewards that for me it's totally worth it, and it's totally doable even in a tough economy. That said, I am established and I've been going for nearly 2 decades, so if you're just starting out now, I might be a little more trepidatious and a little more frightened, because what has happened in recent years is obviously a lot of people are prepared to write free, the rise of the web and what have you. There's a whole kind of other writing industry that to some degree competes with journalism. Yeah, and I think you almost have to have a business plan for yourself there as a writer, and you know, some kind of a buffer, and possibly look at a site.
Great. Ewan, I mean, what would you say, you know, when you worked as an editor and you had freelancers that you were training, and freelancers on your team, and obviously journalists on your team, what kind of skills would you say they need to succeed? Not about the writing.
No, to be honest, it's not about the writing. It's about, as Di says, the hustling, the drive, the determination, the organisation, the small business skills that enable you to be able to, as Di pointed out, well, I think she mentioned Livingston, and I'm going to talk to the chef, I'm going to talk to the old guy who runs the train museum, I'm going to come up with 6 stories for different people, for different magazines, for different audiences. And that really is what is going to make you succeed as a freelance travel writer, or a freelance food writer, or a freelance journalist per se. It's just seeing those little niches that everyone has a story to tell, and you have to get alongside those people and just tease it out of them, and then you turn it into your, as Di says, that part of your business. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so third question from one of our students: what do new writers do that turn editors off? Oh, Di, sorry, I didn't ask you that previous question about the skills, or did I?
I think I covered it. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, sorry.
Business skills. Yeah.
Okay, so what do new writers do that turn editors off? Maybe even you've got some stories from your own lives. Di, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, definitely. I think not understanding the publication and the audience. It's one of the modules that comes up in the courses quite frequently when students have to analyze a publication, and it's often done not through no fault of the students, but at quite a superficial level. They don't go into kind of understanding the model, the business model for the publication. What you sell as a magazine really is your audience to others. So to me, that's quite sort of fundamental, and I have gotten it wrong completely. Like, I tried to pitch an article to the Sunday Times travel section, and it was an interview with a wilderness philosopher, and it was like too deep and serious and pessimistic. It didn't fit the publication at all. And she came back, and I tried to rejig the pitch, and she came back and she's like, "You haven't really read us. You haven't read this section of the newspaper." And it was true. I hadn't actually bought a Sunday Times in ages. And I'd lost touch with the editorial direction, so that pitch fell flat. So I think, yeah, you've got to understand the publication and its audience. And I think editors lose patience if you're pitching the wrong stories to them, because they are very busy people, and there's loads of people trying to sell stories to them. So don't waste the time by getting the basics wrong. And then the other thing is being precious about your writing. So yeah, you can't, like, editors are there to edit, and you have to respect their skills and expertise. And one of my biggest gifts as a writer is working with really good editors, because they make my work even better. And they, you know, I love that. I love it when you send in a piece and you think, yeah, this is pretty good and tight, and then it comes back and you're like, geez, why didn't I just write it like that in the first place? So don't ever be precious about your writing, and you know, respect the skills of the editor. For me, those are two things.
Great. Ewan?
Can't put it better than that. If you want to put it in 2 lines, one is do your homework, which is what Di has just said, and 2, don't oversell yourself, which is part 2 of what Di said. Yeah.
Lovely. Okay. Question number 4. I often find that no features editor is listed. So in that case, do you submit to the editor-in-chief? And if you can't find any editorial contact, is it acceptable to use the same email for public letters to the editor? So this is often a dilemma for freelancers starting out where there is no relationship with the publication. So how do you find the relevant person to submit to?
Buy the magazine, check the person, check page 3, which usually has the appropriate people on it, and then Google. That's kind of like the basic journalism 101. I'd certainly send it to the editor-in-chief. Absolutely no question about it. Preferably not the public letters to the editor, because
Okay.
I'm sorry, in a large media organisation, that one doesn't often get opened. So yes, I would look on page 3, find out who the listed editor-in-chief is, and then, my gosh, you'll probably find your email on LinkedIn, or you'll probably find it on Google, or any other number of places. But yeah, I'd certainly go for the editor.
I agree, and I don't think there's a whole lot of point in sending a pitch to a generic address or to the wrong editor, especially for the bigger publications, which have, you know, very specific sections. It's different if it's like your local newspaper and the editor is, you know, in my little town, it used to be a woman called Hayley Smith, and you just emailed Hayley, and that was fine, you know. But yeah, like if you can try to pitch the New York Times or something, you better pitch the right person, because there are lots of different editors and lots of different sections, and it just shows that you know what you're doing if you target the right person. Yeah. You can also always phone. I know Ewan hates phoning, but if you can't, like I've done that before as well, where I haven't been able to figure out, like sometimes magazines are sneaky, like some of the in-flight magazines, I think, because so many people want to write for them, and they put like a generic address, which I know everybody pitches to. I phone the front desk and I just say, can you put me through to, you know, who's your, you know, travel editor? And her name is Marion. Oh, please can you just give me Marion's, either her phone number or her email address, and then instead of going to like features at or, you know, travel features at, I can actually say Marion at, and that can sometimes be helpful. And then guard those contacts, and also don't be scared to ask colleagues. So I think, I don't know about you, Ewan, but I belong to a couple of freelancing communities and WhatsApp groups and stuff, and most of us are all, you know, it's co-opetition where we work together. So I have also asked colleagues before and said, like, guys, I've got a great, you know, story for whoever. Does anyone have a contact there? Please, can you help? And I've even asked editors that, where I've pitched a story, and a good story, but they've like run something too similar previously, or they already have something else commissioned. And I've like said to the editor, most recently, actually, like last week for Getaway magazine, I pitched a story, and I said, Anton, you know, got this great story, and he's like, no, it's too close to what we've got planned, but why don't you try? And he was actually happy to pass on contact details.
Guys, actually just something that we all too often forget, which is that, of course, there's competition, but this is actually a very, very collegial industry. Perhaps not so much as it was when both of us started out, but certainly you'll find that the best acquaintances, supporters that you can find are actually other journalists. They will always go the extra mile to help someone in the trade out. And joining those groups and becoming part of those groups is it's a really good boost to your freelance career, because yeah, we're all in this together. Even if someone doesn't, you know, someone else is the lucky one who sells their story to Sunday Times. Well, good on them, congratulations. Maybe they'll buy me a wine. You know, that's the way we work.
Lovely. I'm really hearing throughout your answers that being a journalist or being a freelance writer is about relationships and those people skills and relationship building. Would you agree?
Very much so.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And that's quite sometimes it's paradoxical, because you can't please everybody. Not everybody's going to always love what you write, depending on what sort of sphere or space you go into. So you've got to treat a fine line between not just being a people pleaser, can't do that, but building proper relationships based on professional ethics and transparency.
You must be ethics and integrity. You must be honest. You must be true. One of the best pieces of advice that I ever got from a fellow travel writer, harking back to what I just said, was that he said, I've been in this business for 50 years and I've never ever written a story about a destination or about a cruise ship. He said, I've always written stories about people, because the best travel stories are always about that person that you find who might have been the, I don't know, the stoker on the cruise ship. That's the story, not the fact that we went to Paris or Marseille or whatever, and it was lovely. It's the human dimension that makes a travel story. And so those relationships, talking to people, getting alongside people, that's what will make the stories, and that's what will make your career. Not being a shill for a travel company or a cruise company or whatever it may be. It's finding those stories and telling those stories.
Great. I'm just going to go to one of the questions that's come from Peter, who's live here with us. How can I become a successful investigative journalist? Where do you start?
That one, I'm actually going to, what's that phrase the American use? Take the fifth. That's a little bit beyond my series, my expertise. It's, excuse me, it's a very specialized set of skills. It's a very particular trade that depends on the country that you're in, the rules that apply there, the laws that apply there, and the training that applies there, and also the media environment. It's a little bit beyond my, I wouldn't give a one-off answer to that one.
Okay.
And I would also say I'm not a hardcore investigative journalist. I have written stories around anti-poaching and poaching syndicates in South Africa, which is the closest I've ever gotten to investigative journalism. But my advice for somebody who wants to pursue that is to find a mentor and an editor, because you can't do that kind of stuff on your own. It's an ethical and sometimes a legal minefield. The principles are the same. You know, you go after the facts, you protect your sources, you're honest and discreet. You apply all the same principles as you would for sort of normal journalism. But when you're getting into sensitive and legally, ethically sensitive material, crime, people breaking the law or whatever it is, go in with somebody who's been there and work with them. So I would never just, you might have a story and you think that it's got legs and you think that this is something that's worth pursuing and doing, as a proper investigative report. Just find somebody who is really brilliant at that and contact them and then say, got this idea, maybe they can help or mentor you, particularly as you're getting started. That's what I would do.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got another question. This one's from Sarah. And I think that relates to what you were talking about Di, how do you join a journalist group as Ewan suggested? Okay, yeah.
The Southern African Freelance Association, and you pay a small membership fee, and they have like a Google group. And that's often quite useful. Like often we talk about business issues and tax stuff and what have you. And then I've done Freelance Writer Bootcamp, and that's also become a useful community for me to be part of. And then I have a couple of WhatsApp groups where it's just a bunch of us who've worked, or either we've been on a media trip or we've just gotten to know each other through the industry. And somebody took the initiative and started the group, and slowly over the years we've added to it. So that's my community. And then the Writers College. This is an awesome community, and a lot of the graduates and the alumni have gone on to, have fantastic careers and do really interesting work. So yeah, look for Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups, Google groups, and see what's happening in your industry, in your area.
Yeah, great. Ewan, do you want to add to that?
An organisation is called Travcom, Travcom, and that's an organisation of writers, photographers, bloggers, and also travel industry people. In Australia, it's ASTW, the Australian Society of Travel Writers. And beyond those formal groups, exactly what Diane suggested, just reach out and you'll find that there's communities. Meetup.com is one way.
Nice. Okay. So I'm going to move on to our written questions here. Do editors like to see several submissions from a new freelancer before they take a look at their work, or does every submission have a genuine shot?
It's not an exact science, but it harks back to something that we were talking about earlier, which is that the best idea, the good idea, the strong idea, the original idea is going to pique an editor's interest. Mm-hmm. And I really don't think that it's a question of needing to see 6 or 8 ideas from Guy Tipping-Woods. If Guy Tipping-Woods comes to me and she's never been published before, but she's got this really strong original idea, I'm buying. Mm-hmm. So that's my answer.
Great. Di?
Yeah, I would agree, and also just be aware of who you're pitching to. And when you're starting out, like the very busy big publications, like I'm not going to necessarily aim for Nat Geo. So it can also help both in terms of your confidence, but also your sort of ability and that imposter syndrome that we talked about, to just get a few small wins, start with where you're at and get those wins under your belt, and then move on to this. So yeah, it's the same with sources for articles. Like I often have students who they want to write an article about interviewing, and they want to interview Oprah because she's really good at that. And their local radio station might have somebody who's a fantastic source. So I would always say start where you're at and just keep at it. Yeah, the story will, if you've got the right story, you can answer the question, what's the story, why now, and why you're in with a chance every time. Mm-hmm. I'm saying that to myself as well, to convince myself.
So you need courage, confidence, determination, people skills. You've got to know how to hustle, and you must know how to write.
Hey, you left one thing out.
What?
Dumb good luck. Just being in the right place.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's does every submission have a genuine shot? I'm going to say that was a unanimous yes, but it's based on the idea. It doesn't matter who you are, how many articles you've written. It's all about the pitch, the idea, the quality of your writing in that moment, and luck, as Ewan says. So,
I think, sorry, can I just jump in?
Yes.
think Guy brought up a good point a little bit earlier on, which is images. Really work on your photo skills, but you don't have to be Anthony Armstrong. You don't have to be Annie Leibovitz. But if you can add those images or 30 seconds of video, wow, it just became so much more of a proposition for an editor.
Yeah. And Ewan, is that mainly for travel writing, or is that now for anything? Like if you're doing a profile on somebody?
Yes, it is. It is. I was specifically aiming that towards travel writing, but
Okay.
it doesn't matter what the subject is. The more forms of media that you can pitch in, the more valuable your submission becomes.
Okay. Very interesting. Okay. Di, did you want to add anything to that?
I agree. No. We're all multimedia journalists, whether we consider ourselves to be writers. Which I fight against, to be honest, because you use your brain differently when you're interviewing to write and when you're trying to take photos. Again, it's the hustle. But yeah, the reality is that we are all multimedia.
So I've just got another question from Sarah. For photos, for example, for a piece about nutrition, would you add some photos of food?
I think if you're interviewing a nutritionist, you'd get some strong portraits, and maybe if it's a person who prepares food, you get some close and detailed shots of hands, cutting, working with knives. Maybe it's organically grown. You can have a garden shot. I think always go in with a couple to work with, and again look at the magazine or the publication. The web can accommodate more pictures, so sometimes there's more demand from a gallery or like some video. Yeah, but try and be innovative and original, and yeah, shoot your own stuff. Or in South Africa, publications don't always pay for pictures, so you have to do that as a value add. And yeah, just always be sure to credit and be respectful of the photographer who's taken the pictures of the phone. Never just use something else, even just in the picture.
Okay, good. Very good advice. Okay, I'm going to carry on with the next question. After you've submitted an article to a publication, so I'm assuming this is on spec, you're a beginner journalist, you've sent off a piece. So on spec, for anyone that doesn't know, means that you write the full article before and then submit the full article, even though you don't know if it's going to be accepted or not. And that's generally the way we advise people to start in the beginning. How long should you wait before following up? And if you don't ever hear from them, how do you go about withdrawing your piece?
It's tricky because editors are busy, and I think it depends on the individual. Some are quick. I know some very busy editors who always take, if I haven't heard from them in 3 or 4 days, I know just to follow up. Others, just like it's gone into the ether, and I never hear back. I've never actually formally withdrawn pitch. I have said at the end of my email that, if you're not interested, please let me know so that I can try other publications or outlets, but I've never formally withdrawn. Maybe I should have. I don't know. Ewan, you might have more experience as an editor with that, but yeah. And sometimes when you don't hear from an editor, it's easy to also take it personally, like, oh, they don't like me, they don't like my idea, I'm not good enough. And usually it's about them, and it's about their stress levels and their pressure. So, like, yeah, thick skin.
Yeah. Ewan, do you want to say?
That's a very good way of putting it, Di, thick skin. Like you, I've never withdrawn a pitch either. Consciously, anyway, I may have said, oh, well, we're not interested, and submitted it elsewhere. I would have thought for a monthly magazine, if you haven't heard in a month, a gently prodding, polite emails. Just wondered if you had the chance to. But yes, I think that advice about having a thick skin, look, and I've known editors who just absolutely will never respond to an email, which I think is embarrassing. I think it's unprofessional. The fact is, it happens. And yeah, you just have to live with it and think, okay, well, that didn't work. Have another go sometime.
Okay. So I'm going to need a little bit of clarity here. So you've submitted an article, you don't hear back. So you don't formally withdraw the piece, but how long do you wait generally?
4 weeks.
4 weeks, okay.
Yeah, and I would put that in the email. So then if they suddenly do want to use it 3 months down the line and you sold it elsewhere, your email said you expected to hear back by such and such time. And if not, you're going to pass it on to someone else.
Right.
So they can, that just keeps things a little neater. I've done it
Yes.
before. Actually, I did get into a bit of a messy situation where I sold the same story because I didn't hear from an editor and I passed it on, and I sold like the same story to 2 publications. And then I had to do a lot of rewriting and like make it work for both of them. And I somehow did, and we saved those relationships. But yeah, like it can be tricky in the beginning because it's also all different. There's no like one size fits all.
Okay, great. If I get a curt reception on the phone from a magazine, should I take it that they're just not interested in an unknown freelancer? Is this common? So, yeah.
All too often it is. And it's not personal. It's just, unfortunately, you know, there are busy editors and some have people skills and some don't. And yeah, it's just part of putting on the big boys' pants or the big girls' pants and just going, well, okay, it didn't work out so well. Try again. Yeah. It's unfortunate, but it does happen. But
Yeah.
don't take it personally.
A small tip from me as well, which I actually still haven't learned myself, so it's I shouldn't be good. But also, if you know when the publication cycle is, like don't pitch 3 days before they're going to print. You know, sort of know a little bit where things fall in the news cycle. So if I'm going to try and publish something in a Sunday newspaper, don't pitch it on Saturday night or whatever. Pitch it on the Thursday. And ditto for print magazines. If you know that it's published every 2 months, try and get a sense of when their busiest time is, because that's when they've got the least bandwidth to handle new submissions. Their mind is on the current issue. It's not on your idea. And because of the busyness, it might just like fantastic, a great idea, but it just gets lost in the cycle.
Always do your homework. We said this earlier on, but make sure they haven't done a story on Cape Town or Kruger or Queenstown in the past 3, 4, 5 months. And if you are going to submit a story on Queenstown or Cape Town, make sure it's got an angle that's different, that's completely unlike the last story.
Yeah, and a very small tip on that point as well, because if you write internationally, it can be hard to get hard copies of magazines these days, or webzines. So I subscribe to a service called Magster. And I'm not always disciplined about it. So again, I'm like, I should take my own advice. I don't always do it. But Magster or one of those is quite nice because you can then digitally download publication to see what's.
Could you take us very quickly through the process of how to get your foot in the door with a magazine or a webzine publisher? You've just done a course, you're a fresh graduate, you've got no publications behind you, and what do you do? Ewan, do you want to start on that one?
Through that one to me. Well, I guess it goes through all the things that we talk about in the course. Preparing your story, your feature, preparing your pitch to the editor, making sure that you're presenting a professional, well-worked, well-honed piece of work, that you've done your homework, as Di has discussed, that article that you're working on fits the magazine that you have in mind. And I guess that's where you start from. You then send it through. Yeah. There's no absolutely perfect path to it. But the basis is to do the writing to the best of your ability, the research to the best of your ability, the presentation as professional as you can make it, and the pitch as well honed to the target audience and the target editor as you can. Those would be, I think, the four basic rules that I put in place.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Ewan said there, completely. And I think just two small things to add, which we have discussed already, is just find a niche and be focused. So a story about food is very broad and generic. You know, you've got more of a chance of selling a story about, you know, vegan food, or you know, organically grown by a women's commune of, you know, the more specific you get, sometimes the easier it is to get in, because it's very clear what you're going to be writing about. So yeah, I think the genericness sometimes of story ideas, they're too broad. So never be afraid, I would say, to try and focus. And then also a pitch is a blueprint, right? So that's the story that you sell, and then sometimes you go on reports and things turn out a little differently. Just be 100% transparent with the editor 100% of the time, and say, well, this is what I thought I was writing about, but actually as I've gone deeper into it, the angles changed a little bit. And the other thing that you can do, if you have the luxury of time, is you can do a bit of pre-reporting. So what that's a trick that I only learned last year, you know, right in the middle of my career. It can sometimes be helpful just to phone a person and say, like, I wanted to pitch the story, but I want to get the pitch right. So can I do a quick 10-minute Q&A with you? And I do what I call pre-reporting. And then when I submit my pitch, the editor can actually see that I know what I'm talking about. And, you know, there might be a really pithy quote or something that's been said in the context of that first conversation that will actually help the results. So those are just three small things.
Great. Thank you. Very, very valuable advice. I've got another question here from Sarah. Is there anything we should know before submitting an article overseas? And is this tricky to do?
It's not tricky to do in the world as we know it these days. There are very few international boundaries in terms of media. Again, it just comes back to what we've been talking about. Refining the idea, making sure that it's acceptable to the, or within the field of the publication that you're talking to, whether that's digital, whether it's in print. It just comes down to doing your own homework, refining your idea, and then pitching it.
Yeah, and one tip that I got from my husband, who was a Africa correspondent for a Dutch newspaper working out of South Africa, is that for a South African publication, you should never assume anything, and you should expect everything. But there are certain assumptions you can make when writing in South Africa, for example, for a South African audience. And you can go into more detail, like, because people are more likely to be familiar with the context. So if he was writing a story about for me, writing a story about the Kruger National Park, I can do like a micro safari about the bugs and invertebrates, and it's cool for a local publication. But if you try and sell that to the Telegraph, they're really only interested in the lions and the elephants and the big picture stuff. So you often have to change your style of writing depending on the context. So again, that's where knowing your audience is really important, because you have to understand that the readers of that particular newspaper sitting in the Netherlands are not really interested in a marital scandal, you know, between, I don't know, the president and his press secretary or whatever. That's not news to them. But they would be interested in something that's, you know, bigger and more relevant to their own context. So think context and think audience, and let that also moderate the level of detail you include and plan to write your story. I don't know if that makes sense.
Perfect. So I'm assuming, like both Ewan and I, but you both mentioned research your target market. And even if the publication is overseas, thanks to Magster and other digital subscriptions, you can have access to just about any publication. You can study the style, the tone, the content, their past issues. Yeah.
And to be perfectly in South Africa, that's made it financially viable to me. If I didn't have some international clients who paid US dollars, I might not be making it.
Our time is up. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone that's come today. Wherever you are in the world, I'm seeing lots of names from different parts of the world. A big thank you. I hope you got something of value out of the conversation. And to Di and Ewan, a massive thank you for being here. Amazing advice and for sharing your wisdom. And yeah, so, oh good, I'm getting a thank you. This was incredibly useful. So great. Okay.
It's a big pleasure.
So,
Good luck.
we'll also make the video available afterwards for anyone that couldn't make it tonight. Thank you.
Okay.
So wherever you are in the world, have a good day or a good night.